Hello and welcome back to another Runaway American UK edition reaction. My name is Kelly. If you're new to the channel, welcome. On this channel, I react to everything UK. So if you have a UK video, send it my way. This was a buy me a coffee request. So thank you so much for this request, Mr. Smith. This is the channel tunnel planned since 1802. Or it's the channel, right? I think it's called the channel. I know about the channel. I know about the channel. I've never gotten to experience it, but it sounds like it's always sounded absolutely amazing. I wish I could do it at some point. It's on my bucket list of something I would like to do. And I think it was wonderful, like just revolutionary as far as like the timing and everything and what they did. So let's get into the logistics of it and like why it was planned in the first place.
Welcome back to a brand new episode of Mega Projects. This one is all about the Channel Tunnel, also known as the Channel. This is one I'm particularly keen on. I remember when I don't remember when it first opened, but I do remember the first time that I took it, went on a day trip to France with my family. It was pretty cool. Let's just jump in. Forget America and Russia, forget even America and China. One of history's most famous rivalries lies between two countries separated by only a slither of water, just 21 miles at its closest point. That's 33.7 kilometers for you Europeans. Two countries that have engaged in battle time and again over nearly 1,000 years and whose empires dominated vast swaths of the planet. But these old enemies have mellowed with age, and on the 1st of December 1990, something extraordinary happened. Two faces appeared either side of a small hole in a rough rock wall face. One man clutched the Union Jack of the United Kingdom, and the other clutched the French tricolor. They both smiled and shook hands, and the Channel Tunnel was born. Well, not quite. I mean, that was a really tiny hole. It still had a long way to go. And I'm sure, as we will find out, it took way longer and ran over budget. Because this is Mega Projects. Tunnels can be a bit difficult to get excited about. We made a video about the world's deepest hole, which somehow got 100 and something thousand views so far. I don't think we're too worried about that. We can't see them from the outside, and even when we are in one, it's hard to register its scale and size. But they are some of the most labor-intensive projects we have ever undertaken. While you may delight in the fact that you can board a train in London and disembark in Paris 2 hours and 15 minutes later, it is the 35 minutes of near darkness underground that we really should be marveling at. And just a quick note here before we get started, while the majority of trains run between London and Paris, there are services that connect the British capital with Lille, Brussels and Amsterdam. There are also seasonal services that run further south in France, but let's get back to the tunnel because that's where we're focusing today. In total, the Channel Tunnel is 31.35 miles, that's 50.45 kilometers long, which isn't actually long enough to even make it into the top 10 longest tunnels in the world, but this is the longest underwater tunnel on the planet and also the longest international tunnel. And when I was a kid, I really thought that it went through the ocean rather than under the ocean. As an adult, obviously, I know that's a bit dumb. I was disappointed when I went in it and I couldn't look out the window to see. And it isn't just one tunnel, it's actually three. There are two 7.6 meter, 25 foot diameter tunnels built 30 meters, 95 feet apart, used by the trains, and a 4.8 meter, 16 foot service tunnel running between for maintenance and emergencies. These tunnels are then connected with pairs of 3.3 meter, 11 foot diameter passageways from both main tunnels to the service tunnel every 375 meters, that's every 1,230 feet. At its deepest, the tunnel is 70 meters, 230 feet below the water. Wow. And to give you a wonderfully French comparison here, that's about 107 baguettes end to end. Why don't we just do everything in baguettes? Then we don't have to worry about the metric imperial conversion. Easy, and the French will love it. Now, if this wasn't complicated enough, consider that digging was done from both ends simultaneously. Speed was the main reason for this, but I also suspect that neither of these great nations would have accepted the project just going one way. It required a symbolic act somewhere in the middle, and when they finally met, they were just 50 centimeters off the planned meeting point, well within the parameters required. engineering is amazing.
Yeah, that's incredible.
We know that the first part of this tunnel was finally connected in 1990, but incredibly by that point, the idea of a channel tunnel was nearly 190 years old. A Frenchman by the name of Albert Mathieu Favier was the first to outline a plan in 1802, and I apologize, Albert, if I'm mispronouncing your name there. But instead of trains like we see today, Favier envisioned that the journey would be made by horse-drawn carriage with an artificial island midway that would allow for a change of horse. Now, his plans really didn't get anywhere. This was an idea that popped up continuously from then until 1964, when both governments finally agreed to it. Although I doubt in 1964 we were thinking, yeah, we should do it with horses, because we had cars. Famously, in 1881, perhaps frustrated by their government's lackadaisical approach, a group of independently minded engineers thought they would give it a go. But this was no shovel and spade outfit. Sir Edward Watkin and Alexandre Lavallee, a Frenchman who had worked on the Suez Canal, formed the Anglo-French Submarine Railway Company. This sounds like Elon Musk's back in the day. Their efforts were seen as exploratory, but they certainly gave it a good go.
SpaceX.
By the time the project was scrapped in 1882, a tunnel from Shakespeare Cliffs near Dover had tunneled 1,893 metres, 6,211 feet, while on the French side at Sangatte, 1,669 metres, 5,476 feet had been dug. But in the end, political pressure put paid to their efforts. The problem was neither side really quite trusted the other, and this was an issue that constantly dogged the project. Napoleon had dominated the European continent in the early decades of the 19th century, and while his progress had ended with the emperor being banished to a distant Atlantic island, the British still had a bit of a distrust of their Gaelic neighbours across the Channel, and this was a suspicion more than reciprocated by the French. So in short, it was really just a case of too soon. As the idea was brought up again and again, it was often military leaders who raised objections to the project. They were seemingly certain that a tunnel would enable enormous invading armies to one day simply saunter through the tunnel. Even the compromise of a system where both sides could effectively flood the entire tunnel failed to settle suspicions. Nope, it would take the most horrific war the world had ever known to finally calm their fears and push the project forward. A bond already strengthened during World War I was cemented in the aftermath of World War II, two wars in which the British and the French had fought side by side. Interestingly, rumours had circulated during the war that Hitler was using slave labour to dig a tunnel under the Channel. One military analyst went as far as to estimate that it could theoretically be completed in just 18 months.
Ooh.
Obviously, he was wrong.
Yeah, not right.
By 1964, it looked like things were finally beginning to come together. A detailed geographic survey was undertaken, and the two governments finally agreed to greenlight the project, with preliminary work beginning in 1974. And it lasted less than a year. In 1975, the new Labour government, operating under a severe economic crisis, pulled the plug, much to the dismay of the French. The British were already 300 metres, 958 feet, into an experimental dig, but this tunnel would eventually be recycled and used to form part of the modern tunnel. The cost of cancellation to the British government was in the region of $16 million, and that's back in the day dollars. So that is a lot more today. 4 years later, it seemed that things were back on, but with Margaret Thatcher's government refusing to fund the project through taxpayer money, it was opened up to private investment, and by 1985, a short list of ideas had emerged. But strangely, many of them now drifted away from the original tunnel idea. The first was very similar to what we have today, but perhaps slightly simplified. The second came to be known as Eurobridge. Yes, you guessed it, this would be a 22-mile, 35-kilometer suspension bridge with a roadway and an enclosed tube. I mean, that sounds slightly less practical and more complicated to build, but that would be epic. Thirdly was Euroroute, which called for artificial islands to be created in the channel, which would then be connected by a series of bridges. Also epic, but in fact digging a tunnel under the sea is kind of more epic than all of these. Lastly, there was the Channel Expressway, which would be a tunnel, but one that you could drive independently through with ventilation towers midway. Now perhaps some of those seem a little far-fetched, but at that time, even a railway under the channel seemed like a lofty idea. Margaret Thatcher was a great proponent of car usage within the tunnel as it provided a more individual experience, but this was always seen as overly ambitious, not simply in terms of ventilation, but also on safety grounds. There was also fierce opposition to the project from a group who would certainly not benefit from a channel tunnel. Any guesses on that one? Well, it wasn't the military this time. It was the guys running the ferries across the
ferries.
channel.
Okay.
FlexiLink, a global lobby formed by several ferry companies, protested against the plans, especially in the 1980s. They, of course, didn't come out and say they didn't want it because it would ruin their business. No. Of course, it was cleverly designed as an issue about British sovereignty and keeping Britain an island. Kind of sounds like the Brexit argument, doesn't it? But it didn't work. In 1987, voting on the project passed in both the French and British governments. One little point to highlight here, while the French passed it unanimously, there were still holdouts within the British government. Promises of regional Eurostar trains to other parts of Britain certainly helped to sway votes, but they were promises that were never kept. Classic politics.
Yay, politics.
Construction of the Channel Tunnel officially began on the French side in June 1988, with the British leisurely kicking into gear 6 months later in December. It must be said that the challenges faced by the French in terms of digging at least were greater than on the British side. Considering how close they are, you might be excused for thinking that their geology would be basically the same, but that's not really true. Both sides were aiming to tunnel through chalk marl, a relatively kind substance if you want to build a 31-mile, 50-kilometer tunnel. However, the French side contained a higher concentration of microcracks, causing more water to enter and thus making the whole substance much more difficult to tunnel through. But the French had a plan. Rather than simply starting the tunnel from the terminal point in Calais, French engineers built a huge shaft close to the sea, 55 meters, 180 feet in diameter, and 65 meters deep, about as tall as a 20-story house, and it was a space large enough to place the entire Arc de Triomphe in, and that's really big. From here, they began tunneling in 2 directions, one towards their inland terminal and the other towards the UK. In total, the digging was undertaken by 11 tunnel boring machines, or TBMs, weighing just over 1,000 tons each. Their combined weight was more than that of the Eiffel Tower.
Damn.
The diameter of those used in the 2 main tunnels was 7.6 meters, 25 feet, and they extended to about the length of a football pitch. If you remember from one of our previous videos on the Crossrail projects in and around London, the British named their TBMs after famous British women, but this wasn't the case during the Channel Tunnel excavation, with some rather generic alphanumeric titles given. The French, however, were a little more inventive, and the vast mechanical machines boring from the French side came to be known as Brigitte, Europa, Catherine, Virginie, Pascaline, and Séverine. Tunneling took 2 years to complete and pulled out a staggering 4.9 million cubic meters, that's 173 million cubic feet of chalk marl and shale. While the vast majority of it was done using the TBMs, some of the more delicate sections needed to be excavated by hand using smaller pneumatic drills. Another surprising point is that the tunnels are neither straight nor level. A decision was made to try and stay within the chalk marl as much as possible, as it was much easier to excavate, but this meant slight alterations here and there. Sitting on a train, traveling through, it's almost impossible to feel the slight curves, but they are actually there. Sadly, this feat did come at a human cost, and 10 workers lost their lives during construction, mostly in the early stages. While the world knows the 1st of December 1990 as the day the 2 sections of the service tunnel finally met, that's not entirely accurate. In fact, some 31 days earlier, on the 30th of October, a tiny hole was created to connect the 2 tunnels. At just 2 inches, 5 centimeters in diameter, it didn't carry the same kind of excitement as what was to come, but it was important nonetheless. Maybe they just stick like a little tiny cocktail stick flag. On December the 1st, 1990, the world watched in anticipation as Englishman Graham Fagg and Frenchman Philippe Cazette managed to reach through the now enlarged hole. The 2 had been chosen randomly from the workers on the project, and it added a sense of togetherness that it wasn't politicians or executives in front of the cameras, but rather 2 men who had quite literally sweated to help reach this incredible feat. It was a testament to the 13,000 people who had participated in the construction.
That's crazy.
Bonjour, mon ami, the Englishman said. Hello, my friends. Welcome to France. Came the French response. The 2 reached through to shake hands and exchanged their flags. The moment, immortalized on television, has become iconic to both Britain and France. A symbol not only of an engineering wonder, but one of friendship and one of cooperation. If you're wondering why Philippe Cazette said welcome to France, well, it's because the tunnels hadn't actually met halfway. The British side had tunneled slightly further than the French. This has never been completely explained, but probably lies with the more difficult geology on the French side.
Queen Elizabeth.
Despite the euphoria that greeted the meeting undergrounds, the project wasn't even remotely finished. In fact, it was over 4 years later, on May 6, 1994, that two trains met nose to nose in Calais. One had travelled through the tunnel from London and carried Queen Elizabeth II. The other had come from Paris with French President François Mitterrand on board. A ceremony in Calais was followed by the same in Folkestone, with the Queen and the President travelling aboard a train through the tunnel from France to the United Kingdom for the first time. Though passengers did not begin travelling for several months, the first freight train rumbled through the tunnel on the 1st of June 1994.
Wow, okay. I didn't realize it was that old. I, for some reason in my mind, thought it had happened, it did happen during my lifetime. I was born in 1992, but I, for some reason, thought it was in the 2000s that it was built, not in the 90s. Don't know why that was, but...
There are two main ways that you can use this service. Foot passengers can embark at any of the destination terminals: London, Paris, Lille, Brussels and Amsterdam, but also at Ashford and Ebbsfleet in the UK and Calais in France, which are the closest stations either end of the tunnels. This service is known as the Eurostar. The Eurotunnel is used between Folkestone and Calais and carries only freight and automobiles and takes just 35 minutes, depositing you easily on the road systems of either Britain or France. The Eurostar trains are 402 metres, 1,318 feet long, and can carry a total of 900 passengers, roughly double what a jumbo jet can hold. With a full complement on board, the train would weigh 980 tons. That's about 77 double-decker buses. On the British side, at least, it's also a record breaker. On the 30th of June 2003, a Eurostar reached 160 miles per hour, 257 kilometers an hour, which was a UK train speed record. The Eurotunnel trains, known as Le Shuttle, are much larger at 800 meters, 2,624 feet in length, the size of 7 football pitches, and they're 4.2 meters, 14 feet across. Passenger vehicles are carried in car shuttles, which are accessed by driving on and off. Freight trains work on a separate service completely, which is in fact semi-open, meaning that the carriages aren't entirely enclosed. Lorries are manoeuvred on board, and then the drivers have an area known as the club car, where they can wait during the trip.
Okay, very interesting.
It's fair to say that it hasn't been an easy ride for the Channel Tunnel. Today, on average, around 60,000 people travel through the tunnel each day, with around 4,600 lorries, 140 coaches, 7,300 cars using the service. Impressive numbers, yes, but overall, since its launch, the numbers have been lower than anticipated. The rise of budget airlines proved a serious competitor to Eurostar that can sometimes equate to several times the cost. However, numbers have risen steadily in terms of foot passengers, at least. In 2004, nearly 3 million people used the service, while in 2018, that number hit 11 million. So, the Channel Tunnel has seen a number of serious incidents since its opening. 6 fires have occurred either on the trains or within the tunnels themselves, the most serious of which happened on the 11th of September 2008, leading to several passengers requiring medical assistance for smoke inhalation. The fire caused £60 million in damage and meant full service did not resume for another 5 months. On the 18th of December 2009, during a colder than normal winter, snow on the outside of the trains melted within the tunnel, eventually causing a massive power failure. 5 London-bound trains ground to a halt inside, trapping 2,000 passengers on board, some for as long as 16 hours. This
Oh my
was the first
God.
time the service tunnel had been used for an evacuation. The tunnel has also become embroiled in a deeper controversy surrounding illegal immigration. Almost as soon as it opened, the tunnel attracted illegal immigrants or would-be asylum seekers looking for a way into the UK. By 1997, sufficient numbers of people had built up in Calais for the Red Cross to open a camp in an old abandoned warehouse that had been used during construction. The camp, known as Sangatte, swelled quickly, and by 2001 there were almost 1,500 people living in it. In 2015, that number had doubled, with authorities stating that between January and July, 37,000 people had been intercepted either trying to enter the tunnel or transportation vehicles heading into it. This has led to the deaths of 9 migrants, as well as a van driver in 2017 who was killed after his van hit a roadblock erected by protesters blocking an auto route leading to the tunnel near Calais.
Wow. Okay. Unbelievable.
In 1994, the American Society of Civil Engineers compiled a list of what they believed were the 7 wonders of the modern world, highlighting the greatest civil engineering achievements of the 20th century. And there was only one tunnel that made it onto the list.
Channel.
The Channel Tunnel will rightly be regarded as one of the most important projects of the last century, a mammoth undertaking nearly 200 years in the imagination that pushed human endeavor further to its limits and further than some had ever thought possible. But it was one made all the more astonishing by the fact that this was a joint venture between those 2 eternally quarreling cousins. Over 8,000 years ago, it would have been possible to walk from Britain to France over frozen ice. As temperatures rose, those 2 pieces of land, which would eventually go on to form countries, were separated. There they remained, so close, but yet so far, until 1990, when an Englishman and a Frenchman shook hands through a small hole 70 meters beneath the waves. So this was mega projects. That was the Channel Tunnel, a truly incredible piece of engineering. And I think, even though it's not one of the longest in the world, not even in the top 10, the fact that it made that list of incredible engineering achievements is just a testament to how incredible of a mega project it is.
Yeah.
And I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do subscribe. There is a button below. Smash that like button if you like this video.
Give mega projects a like or a follow if you are interested in videos such as his. He definitely seems to be extremely well researched. This was extremely informative. I really enjoyed the video, and he's very personable as well, so I really liked listening to him. As I said, the Channel is definitely something I had heard of before in my life. It's something I had wanted to experience for a very long time. The Eurostar was actually very close to me. I lived in Lille for about a year in France, so I'm familiar with the Eurostar. I never took it, mostly because, as he said, budget airlines, about the same price or cheaper, actually usually cheaper. So I never really took the service. I probably would have had I stayed in Lille at some point, because I did always want to try and travel the Channel or do or travel like to London from Lille. Extremely informative, a crazy bout of ingenuity. It's crazy to me that also that someone had originally planned it out with like horse and carriage. Is what's crazy. And then a place to stop and change horses on the way. Makes sense to me. The drawing of that was hysterical to me. I loved it. It was really, really funny. As well as that others had attempted it in the like SpaceX kind of like thing of like Elon Musk back in their day of like, we're going to take on this project by ourselves. We can accomplish it. We can do it. They obviously got like a decent amount of digging done, but just a marvel that one would think of this and then have the ingenuity to actually build it and make it like a working, functional thing for people to use daily. And I can't believe so many people use it. As he said, it wasn't as many as they anticipated, but there have been budget airlines and all of these other ways to get places. Ferries still exist as well. So it would just depend on the passenger of like what they feel like doing. I prefer a train to a plane. But a lot of times planes are cheaper and I will go with the plane. But I prefer a train. I always would rather take a train if I could possibly. Amazing feat. And that was it was a really great, cool picture, as he said, like with the Frenchman and the Englishmen like shaking hands with each other, waving each other's flag. Like, it is amazing given the history between France and the UK, like what the battles that were fought, as they said, like with Bonaparte, like Napoleon and everything. Like, maybe they still had some ill will towards France at that period. So like building this was not going to be popular amongst the government or the people. And then it did become popular. It still had some issues along the way, but it did get built and it is successful. Obviously, there are problems with any type of transportation. There's always going to be some issues. Doesn't sound like haven't been casualties except in the building of it. So it sounds like it's a relatively safe or extremely safe way to get some from point A to point B. Extremely interesting to listen to, though. I really love these videos. It's so cool to listen to how people came up with these thoughts, how they like finish them. I had no idea about those like things that were used to build the tunnels. They were massive. That was crazy just seeing them, because I had no idea. Like you wouldn't in your mind. Like I was like, oh, they built a tunnel. I don't know why in my mind I'm thinking like they were just like there like digging. Like they would have been there for like 1,200 years or so, like, you know, some crazy number. But no, they obviously use these massive machines to like dig, and then had to use like still machines, but people using the machines in like more sensitive areas. Wonderful video. Really enjoyed watching it. Thank you so much for this special request. If you have your own special request, head over to Buy Me a Coffee if you want me to react to it 100%. If you were kind of like, I would like you to react to this, but like totally fine also if you can't, like leave it a comment, and I do try and still react to those. I just may not get to them as fast, or I may not see them. But still, always enjoy talking to you guys. Please leave a comment. Tell me, have you ever ridden the tunnel? And was it enjoyable? Like, is it a fast trip? They said, I think it's like 2 hours long. So I would imagine it's a quite a fast trip. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.